Okay, good evening, viewers. So today we will going to discuss about your two units, that is Unit 10 and Unit 11. Unit 10 is about relationship between state and state in developed and developing countries, and Unit 11 is states and civil society. Okay, so first we discuss about states in developed and developing countries. Okay. So when we look at the map of the world, okay, almost the world is surface is divided into separate parts. That means total world is divided between separate territories, okay, where each part represents a nearly definite geographical entity known as the state, okay. And since most of us are citizens of states and live without the boundary of one, the state is probably the greatest determinant of how our lives turn out. Okay, when we lived mm, by a certain or which is boundary by a territory that we call a state. Okay, then our interactions with the state shape and conditions almost every spheres of our daily life, from cattle to grave. Okay. The states also provides a wide range of services for the security and protections of every individuals in the society and delivers public good for a better life. Okay, on the other hand, the power of the state also compels us to do certain things and bars us from doing other things. Okay, we are obliged to obey the laws of the state, and those who disobey the liability, or those who disobey the rules or law framed by the state, may be they given punishable. Okay, punishable by the law. Okay, which exercise the so legitimate control over violence. Okay, through which we can reduce violence. Okay, irrespective of the society we live in, be a liberal, capitalist or socialistic, the state is now the dominant political institutions. Okay, according to some ideologies, they said that state may be a dominant institutions. Okay, and standing above all other institutions, which has a influence in politics, economy, culture, and almost all aspects of the contemporary society. Indeed, it would not be an exaggerations to say that we bring an end our lives within the confines and jurisdictions of the state. Okay, it is ubiquitous, also obvious, that perhaps no other institutions impact our lives in a way the state does. Okay, therefore the state is almost universally considerable in necessity for collective livings. It exists whenever and wherever man live in organized society. Then once Aristotle said, man live outside the state, may be a god or may be a beast. Okay, but then what is the state and what makes a state? Okay, curiously look at the state reveals that the concept of surrounded in many ambiguities. The first unit of block will introduce you to some critical aspects of the state. Okay, which we will discuss. Okay, then what is state? This question appears to be simple, but the answer is far more elusive or exclusively different than what is normally perceived. In the course of answering it, several definitions have been given to the state by various scholars who venture to study it, but no definitions ever has been able to capture the state in its entity. Okay, and then the primary reason for lack of consensus on the definition of the state has been the difference in perspective and views from which the state is envisaged. Okay, the liberal, for instance, view the state as an organized social institution or a a community of man which stands above all other organizations in the society. While for Marxists, the state is an instrument of exploitations and dominations of one class over another. Likewise, the anarchist, Democrat, and Gandhians all have different definitions of state. Some see the state in terms of morality, while other view it as institutionalizations political power. There are others who view it as a social phenomena or a juristic personality or a monopolistic organizations. And for anarchists like Peter Kropotkin or Bakunin, the state is an enemy of a man and a great hindrance in the path of human progress, according to anarchists. Okay, among various definitions given to the state, one of the most authoritative definition is the given by German scholar Max Weber. Okay, who defines state as a compulsory political organizations with a centralized government that maintains a monopoly of the legitimate use of force within a specific territory. Okay, one fundamental aspect found in Weber's definitions is the power of the state to exercise its authority and use of violence, which is commonly referred to as the sovereignty of the state. It legitimizes the state to effectively and independently enforce its will over its subjects, who are obliged to accept the authority of the state as long as they continue to live within its boundary. Okay, Weber's definitions thus afford certain fundamental characteristics of statehood, such as the notions of territoriality, okay, and access to the legitimate use of force within its territorial jurisdictions, which are essential requirement for the existence of the state and also a compulsory element for continuation of its operation. The state, therefore, is the sole authority which has the right to use violence. The Weberian conceptions of territorial state was a significant development in the contemporary discourse of the modern state. It has influenced the work of many other scholars who gave similar definition to the state. R.M. Macaber, okay, for instance, called the state a territorial society with power of coercion. Okay, and then another definitions of states widely cited among contemporary writers was provided by J.W. Garner, who defined state as a community of persons more or less numerous. Okay, permanently occupying a definite portions of territory independent or nearly so of external control and possessing an organized government to which a great body of inhabitants render habitual obedience. Okay, the state therefore has too many definitions formulated in various senses, but at most the state is taken to mean as some sort of abstract conceptions, but also a concrete entity that can be identified with physical elements. Okay, from the above definitions we can observe four fundamental attributes in the states which are known as the basic elements of states. Okay, namely the populations, land, government, and sovereignty. Okay, well, land, this indicate territory. Okay, population, territory, government, and sovereignty. In the absence of any one of these factors, there can be no state. Okay, that means all the four factors are compulsory in nature. Okay, without absence of any one of the element, the state cannot complete it. Okay, then state and related terms. What are the related terms, or what are the related link between states? Okay, in common parlance, this idea of state is often confused only loosely used as synonymous with others terms such as nation, country, government, nation state, and so forth. Okay, though these words are quite close to the idea of states, they are different both in theory and practice. Okay, for instance, the term state one must be sure is essentially a political concept, whereas the world country is purely geographical. Thus, in a sense, one may say that every state is a country, but unless the country is independent or has a government, it cannot be a state. Again, a state is also different from the concept of nation, which carries a cultural political connotations that refers to a community of people bound together by some shared identity, which can be based on language, religion, caste, culture, and any other form of collective identity, often treated as national identity that distinguishes one nation from another. Okay, in this context, a nation requires a collective sense of oneness, which is inherently subjective. Okay, whereas the state may exist in the absence of this oneness. Okay, and when this national unity is attached to a specific state, it creates the concept of nation state, which is the most predominant form of state today. Okay, however, technically speaking, a nation state is only possible when all the people within the states are collectively bound together by a common national identity. In this regard, there is hardly any state in the world today which can be perfectly called a nation state in a strict sense of the term. Okay, though there may be community of people who identify themselves as a nation, but without the state. Okay, for example, the Jews who are widely recognized as one of the most intelligent people had no states of their own before the present states of Israel was created after Second World War. Okay, others like the Tibetans, okay, the Catalans, etc., are sometimes considered as peoples without a state, though they may live within a states which they do not think they are own. Okay, likewise, another term often misunderstood as the states is a government. Okay, it is often assumed that the state and government coincide, and most definitions of the state also includes a reference to government. However, one should be aware of the distinction between the two. Okay, the state is much more than the government. It is the state that has the authority of the legitimate use of force, while the government is merely an agency or apparatus which is expected to function on behalf of the states. Then, what is the views of Marxist and liberal perspectives of the state? Okay, what they think about the state? Okay, as noted earlier, the state is viewed from different theoretical prospect. Okay, the most comprehensive prospect out of them are the liberal and Marxist perspective of the states. Okay, that means states can be viewed from the different perspectives, but the most important perspective is liberal perspectives and Marxist perspectives. Okay, uh, the liberal perspectives of the state is based on the principles of liberalism. Liberalism is primarily focused on freedom, right, liberty, modernity, progress, development, etc. Okay, to whom? To individuals. Okay, in fact, it relates to everything that affects daily life. Okay, therefore, the primary concern of the state, according to liberalism, should be protection of individual rights, property, and upholding the values of democracy, liberty, justice, and so on. Okay, Thomas Hobbes was among the first who reflect on the liberal perspective of the state. In the Hobbesian concept, the state is regarded as preeminent in political and social life, which has emerged as a contract of free and equal individuals in the society. According to him, while individual exist prior to the formation of society and the state, it is the state that provides the conditions of existence of the former and pursue their interest. In a slightly similar fashion, John Locke also argued that the state is an instrument for the protection of individual rights and property, okay, which is law towards the relations of the states, okay. Therefore, from liberalism, the states came into existence not only for the sake of good life, but also dispensable for human existence, because in the absence of it, there will be disorder and anarchy, where conditions of war of all against all will prevail. That means state is an important instrument for the protections of life, liberty, justice to the individual. If there is no right, these things cannot be protected, okay. So there is, state is a very important concept, but according to liberal concept, they give less importance to the state. They says the state must be possessed, but they possess only because they must provide protection to the individual rights, liberty, justice. That's why state possess, okay. The states acts as a impartial, okay, impartial arbiter among competing groups and individuals, protecting each individual citizens from the encroachment from fellow citizenship. The states is viewed as a neutral arbiter serving the interest of all and upholding what is called the common interest and public interest. That means all the common interest and public interest must be protected by the state, okay. On the other hand, Marxist with the state not as a protector of rights of property of individual, but an apparatus or instrument of dominant class to suppress to other class. That means, whereas on the one hand, liberal said that state must be important for the individual, for the protections of right, liberty, justice, and so on. On the other hand, Marxist says that state is an instrument of domination. Okay, that means state always favor to the rich sections of the society, and they dominate to the poor classes of the people, okay. That's why they think that state a day come when poor will win over the rich, and at that time there is no state, and they can establish a classless society, okay. Unlike the liberal view of the state, Marxists argue that the state can neither represent nor stand for the community as a whole. It can only stand for the dominant class alone. The state therefore exists not for all in the society, but for those who belongs to dominant class. Okay, that means state always give an importance to the dominant classes or dominant sections of the society. That's why state is an instrument of exploitation according to Marxist view. The states, in short, is a class state created with the purposes of suppressing its class enemies. Okay, that's why they do not support class. They do not support state. Okay, then what is the modern concept of state? Okay, the idea of states had gone through a long and check of history since the dawn of human civilization. Mankind has lived a okay collective life under some form of authoritative political institutions. With this collectivized living, people could live a settled life while refraining from the selfish and disorderly traits of human perversity. Okay, in different phases of history, such sort of institutions appeared in one more or the other, which may have made oblique reference to the idea of state. Okay, the Greek in the ancient time called the polis. The Roman used the expression like civitas. Okay, then respublica or republi. Okay, the tenors adopted the term status, from which probably the modern term states was derived. Okay, yet the concept of state as it exists and understood in the present form of contemporary modern, okay, it can be traced to the writing of the 16th century Italian thinker Niccolo Machiavelli in his famous book The Prince. Okay, Machiavelli defined the state as the power which has authority over man. Okay, Machiavelli does explain the state in terms of the positions of the ruler in regard to its subject. Okay, this Machiavelli conception of states then become the focus of attention for many political thinker in Europe. Okay, particularly in Italy. Okay, France and England. For instance, Bodin describe the state as a lawful government with sovereign powers. Then Thomas Hobbes speaks of the state as a public power which gives people their own life. Similarly, Bentham considers the state as a means of attaining the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. Subsequently, the term state came into use widely in the vocabulary of politics, okay, first in Europe and then exported to rest of the world through colonialism. Okay, then theorizing the developmental states. Okay, that means what is the in which way states work in developing countries. Okay, a state continued to a pivotal role in a contemporary society. It has received foremost concern for theorizing in political theory and comparative politics, but the traditional approaches to the study of states have primarily been from epistemological, historical, and institutional aspect, focusing on its origin, compositions, or administrative functions. However, the post-Second World War period witnessed an outpouring of scholarship which attempts to articulate and theorizing the modern state from economic and developmental perspective. The idea of development was conceived out of two post-historical circumstances. One was the recovery of rebuilding of post-war Europe and Japan, propelled by the euphoria of victory of Western capitalism. The second was the beginning of decolonization and the necessity for a new perspectives from the newly independent countries. The dominant belief among liberal thinkers was that most societies in the world, in the non-Western world, were suffering from traditional features which hindered the development process. Okay, they argue that economic advancement will not be possible without a firm social base and liberal institutions. In the 1960 and 1970, many social scientists identify two fundamentally different sets of states categorized on the basis of their development level. The state in advanced developed countries as distinguished from the state in the developing countries. The attitude and behavior of these two different categories of states are quite different in terms of their economy, polity, or society. Before we go into the specific, we shall first try to understand the intent meaning of the term development or which the reference is made. Okay, then what is the meaning of development? The relevance of the term development in this context demonstrated two interpretations. Okay, the first interpretation is that the idea of development is overwhelmingly and often exclusively understood in economic terms but less in political and governance term. Okay, the second interpretation is broader than just economic growth or economic development, that also includes the presence of progressive political and social values. While the former conceptions of development was narrow, the latter emphasized the development of the state in its totality so that it promotes justice, liberty, equality, freedom of expression, social mobility, or any other factor for people to lead productive, okay, create and fulfilling lives. Okay, it was the former interpretations of the idea of development that dominated in the 1960s and 1970s, resulting in emphasizing industrializations or emulating the West. Okay, it is primarily because of the ethnocentric presumptions or approaches of Western scholars that the West is developed and ideal, okay, better than the rest of the world, and hence the comparatively backward states of the non-Westerns can hope to develop using the West as a model, okay, but nonetheless, measuring development or success of a state requires a wide range of markers, okay, which include adequate housing, access to educations, and access to educations, healthcare, life expectancy, adequate income, successful government policies and planning, and various other parameters to measure of quality of life, okay. Then what are developed and developing countries, okay. Which country we call developed country and which country we call developing countries, okay. There is no universal agreed upon criteria for what makes a country developed or developing, okay. It can also be argued that all states are developing simply because no society can afford to remain stagnant or stop developing unless it is degenerating or decaying, okay. Though people may disagree on the precise definitions of this term, they tend to have certain similarities in their interpretations, okay. For instance, if some people are randomly gives names of few countries, say just like Germany, Namibia, Brazil, Cambodia, and the United States, and ask them to identify which are developing countries and which are developed, it is very likely that people will say Namibia, Brazil, and Cambodia are developing, while Germany and United States are developed. Okay, but how these distinctions are made, how can we can make distinction between developed and developing countries, just like India is also a developing country, so how can we say that India is a developing country, okay. There are certain yardsticks on which yardsticks, that means measurement instrument, okay. There are certain yardstick on which countries fit these two categories, such as the country GDP and per capita income, level of industrialization, infrastructure, living standards of people, etc. Okay, these are the yardsticks which we can measure that one country is either developed country or developing country. Okay, in the post Second World War period, colonialization began to decline and countries got independent one after another. Okay, as a result, a new group of countries emerged which were formerly under colonialism. Okay, these countries become known as post-colonial countries, mostly found in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. They account for nearly 70% of the world population. To understand the nature of the state in these countries, it is important to look at their historical experience of colonialism and also the challenge faced by the post-colonial societies. Okay, at the time of independence, these societies faced acute economic crisis, okay, problem of illiteracy and education, public health, okay, social tensions, lack of political awareness, and so on. Okay, in short, they are development deficit. Okay, therefore, the primary tasks before post-colonial societies were economic development and socio-political progress. Okay, it is due to these cities, these post-colonial countries have been clubbed together to be called as developing countries or developed societies. Okay, another set of countries is the developed countries or the industrialized capitalist countries of Western Europe and North American countries. Okay, other like New Zealand, Australia, and Japan are also included in this in this category. Okay, they are also included in the developed country due to their level of development and modernizations. Okay, according to Oxford Dictionary of Sociology, developed countries are those which achieved high level of economic efficiency, growth, and standard of living for their populations. Okay, therefore, Andrew Heard suggested economic dependence and widespread poverty are the defining criteria of states constituting the third world. Okay, according to the United States, a developing country is one with a relatively low standard of living, developed industries base and moderate to low human development index, okay, means HDI. This vast majority of these countries still do not enjoy access to education, healthcare, sanitation, potable water, or other things considered as hallmark of modernity in the West. Okay, this is not to suggest that the states in developed countries do not share the burden of developing countries. They do not in terms of poverty, income inequality, and developmental issues. These terms generally imply that the state in the developing countries lack political, social, and economic development as compared to developed countries. Okay, this is the basic distinction between developed and developing country. Okay, then nature of states in developing countries. Okay, the states in advanced development countries have different historical, cultural, traditional, or institutional structures. Though what distinguishes the state in developed countries from the states in developing countries is not an absolute. Okay, and namely of them may face challenge similar to post-colonial developing societies. They are two fundamental characteristics common to them. Firstly, they are highly industrialized, and second, large portion of the country economic activities remains under private ownership and control. These two characteristics make them distinct from those in developing world. Okay, according to Gramsci, the state in advanced countries is ruled by perfecting the ideological apparatus rather than the through pervasive measures like the use of force. Okay, according to him, the state consists of two elements: the coercive apparatus like police, army, and the judiciary to uphold the authority of the ruling class through force, and institutions of civil society such as media, school, colleges, political parties, pressure groups, trade union, etc. are the institutions of hegemony used by the ruling class to comply to its rules. States in advanced developed countries, therefore, are highly industrialized and have well established democratic political institutions and stable government. However, activities of government governance are largely in the hands of relatively small number of non-state private individuals who continue to own and control disproportionate share of wealth and administrative power. These few individuals who enjoy the ruling power from the class which Marxists call the ruling class. This ruling class who owns a majority of the property and controls the state system. In this regard, Miliband pointed out that the most significant feature of the state in advanced and developed countries of capitalism is the continued existence in them of private and ever more concentrated economic power. As a result, these powerful people enjoy a massive preponderance in society and control over the state's policies and actions. Okay, then nature of states in developing countries. States in developing countries of Asia, Africa, and Latin America faced tremendous challenges when they emerged as independent states. Okay, the vast majority of these countries faced problem of endemic poverty, economic dependence, ethnic, religious, or tribal conflict, imperialistic exploitations, widespread corruptions, literacy, political turmoil, and glaring inequalities. Okay, the main task before them was to fight against this backwardness. Okay, but the newly independent states failed to maintain political stability, which was most or much needed for social, economic, and political transformations. It was primarily because the various institutions, apparatus, and agencies of the modern states, which the developed countries had taken centuries to formulate and define themselves. The developing countries were expected to have them in place almost instant after their colonial masters left. Okay, many of these societies were in semi-tribal or semi-feudal conditions with diverse culture, religious, languages, races, and ethnic groups. In many instances, tribal or religious groups which were traditionally bitter rival were thrown together in new states, leaving the society prone to instability and civil war. For instance, in 1967, Nigeria plunged into a sebulous civil war when the majority ethnic group Igbo tried to seize the form an independent state called Biafra. Okay. Similarly, in 1994, Rwanda witnessed one of the bloodiest genocide in modern history when the majority Tutors slaughtered minority Tutsis. Okay, likewise, the civil war in Sri Lanka between majority and minority in Kenya were also all outcome of nation building process in diverse societies. Okay, these internal unrest or civil war often plunge into anarchy or de facto collapse of a state. At it happened in Syria, okay, Yugoslavia, Sudan, Somalia, and more recently in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan. Okay, in such a condition, most developing states have failed to perform their basic functions, which include protecting the state from internal and external aggressions, better governance, a strong law and order, social development, and economic growth. Okay, this inability of developing state to fulfill their prescribed duties in what Nidal called the soft state. Okay, the soft states of the state, according to Midal, is a common nature of the state or societal indiscipline prevalent developing world, particularly in South Asia states which are unable to protect their citizens' interest in the first instance, and in the second, the low capacity of the state in law enforcement and implementing economic policies and program. Okay, again in 1960. The post-colonial states were also extremely obsessive about political independence and self-reliance. They also had little faith in the capacity of private enterprises and free market. Okay, as a result, most states focused on achieving self-reliance through imports substituting industrializations. They encourage the public sector enterprises and put massive restrictions and regulations on private sector and the inflow of foreign goods and technology through high tariff and rigorous diplomatic hurdles. Okay, in India, for example, restrictions on private enterprises were so strong that the state was often termed as the license Raj. Okay, the primary motive was to restrict foreign interference in the economy and control economic interactions with the outside world. Okay, then we discuss about changing nature of states. Okay, since the 1980s, states around the world, both in developed and developing countries, have faced the gale of globalizations. Okay, that means the forces of globalizations which lead to huge transformations in their polity, economy, and society. In India, 1991 globalizations, the forces of globalizations came to force. Okay, globally, trade rather than productions for domestic consumption has become the driving force of the new global economy. Okay, this trajectory of globalization coincides inside with increased industrialized productions and rapid advancement in high quality technology. Okay, for example, the advancement in information and communication technology has connected countries around the world like never before. Okay, the implications of all these for the states was to cope up with the forces of globalizations. Another remarkable changes brought by this globalization on the global scene were the free trade and free flow of finance and free markets, okay, typically labeled as new liberalism. Okay, as a result, multinational corporations or MNCs have made significant presence in the global economy. Okay, it was also marked by increasing role of global financial institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Okay, one of the most significant changes brought by these transformations to developing countries was the opening of their markets to the global market. As a result, developing countries were compelled to take different development strategies. Okay, or strategies guided the changing situation. Strategies guided by what was known as the Washington census in order to adjust and adapt the changing situations. Okay, thus many developing states adopted various radical reform and monetary and fiscal policies, which were implemented sometimes voluntarily and often under pressure of IMF or World Bank or WTO and other global economic institutions. Okay, though the proponents of Washington census claiming that the guidelines were intended to help the countries that face financial crisis. Okay, many critics pointed out that the policies were unhelpful, okay, and imposed harsh conditions on developing countries. Okay, that means the policies of globalization not become so much of fruitful in developing countries. Okay, for example, these financial institutions put pressure on developing countries like India, Bangladesh, Nigeria, etc., to adopt structural adjustment program in 1980s and 1990s, which increased their dependency on global financial institutions. Okay, the adjustment programs are reform allowed global financial institutions to intervene in their economic affairs, particularly in monetary policy, budgetary policy, policies of trade and commerce, and also in the management of state enterprises. Okay, this extremely imposed conditionalities compel the state to change not only their economic policy but also their political, legal, and institutional aspects. This has undermined the economic autonomy of the states, which franchise Fukuyama described as the end of nation states. Okay, with all these global economic transformation, states both in developing and developed countries have diverse for themselves several program of action aiming to roll back the state. Okay, these programs aim to curb the state intervention, cut public welfare expenditures, private state run enterprises, restrict the power of trade union while promoting the doctrine of free market liberalisms and competitive individualism. Okay, such policies led to what is today we call the new liberal state or new liberalisms is basically a strategy of capitalist accumulations or a specific growth model which undermine the welfare states model while focusing on extra economic preconditions. Okay, in short, it may be defined as a liberal of the free market. Okay, therefore new liberal attempts to reorganize the world economy by encouraging transnational capital and international finance. One of the unique features of neoliberalism has been the permeable state borders due to decline in state power on fiscal matter and facilitated by the free flow of mobile capitals. Okay, most states are now under pressure to private education, electricity, health, water, and many other basic services from demands made by powerful global economic governance institutions like WTO, IMF, and more recently like Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, etc. Okay, the decision making power of these global financial institutions are in favor of the rich and advanced developed countries. Therefore, the dynamics of globalization and new liberalism has strengthened the rich countries, usually at the expense of the poor countries, and poor countries or developed countries. That means the process of globalization is fruitful, or is it's beneficial to only to the developed countries. Okay, developing countries, while developing countries do not have that much of benefited from the process of globalizations. Okay, so this is all about our states in developing and developed countries. Then now we discuss states and civil society. Okay, the relationship between state and civil society has been a core issue of politics. Okay, both in theory and practice. Okay, in the last 3 decades or so, there has been a renowned attention in social science on the idea of civil society. Okay, the concept of civil society is generally identified with the activities of certain non-state and non-governmental organizations, which comprise a wide range of organized group of different forms, size and functions, and spatially group which share similar view and interests that engage in a collective politics. Okay, these are alternative conceptions of civil society which regard it as a types of society and as a public sphere in which issues of common or public concerns are deliberated and resolved. Okay, though one can trace the conceptualizations of political of civil society to the ancient Greek and Roman period, it was only in the last quarter of the 20th century that the term civil society gained wider acceptance and become an integral part of the political and social discourses on democracy and development. Okay, with the turn of the new millennium, the civil society state relationship attracted considerable attention. Okay, this is no doubt due to the fact that conditions for the expanding role of civil societies were created by the new liberal doctrine that rollbacked or minimized the role of the state. Okay, it is in this background that this unit will introduce you to the meaning, evolutions, nature, and the role of civil society, and elucidate the changing relationship between the civil society and the states. Okay, then what is the conceptual meaning of civil society? And the meaning or the term of civil society, like many other concepts of political theory, has undergone several changes in its history, and there is no consensus in the meaning of civil society. How do we make sense of the term that has come into everybody use? Okay, the widely accepted notions of civil society is that of regarding is a part of society. Okay, it's relatively of recent origin. It can be traced to the writing of Alex de Tocqueville, a French who traveled across the United States in 1930. He linked the people incomparable tendency to form voluntary associations, okay, with emerging democracy in America. In most of the country where democratic principles arise, we found there that we found there civil society organizations. Okay, he believed or Tocqueville believed that democracy depend on the many things beside voting, and that voluntary associations had an important role in the strengthening democracy by providing a means of solving collective problems. That means they through the organizations of civil society, democratic may be fruitful to us. Okay, through the civil society organizations, many problems can be solved. Okay, so among democratic notions, all citizens are independent and weak. They can achieve almost nothing by themselves, and none of them could force his fellow to help him. Okay, therefore they sink into a state of impotence if they do not learn to help each other voluntarily. Besides, voluntary associations indirectly contribute to democracy by drawing individual out of their private concern, okay, where they would otherwise stay focused and striving. and enable them to be part of something larger than the circumstances of their own existence. Okay, Tocqueville described this voluntary and other intermediary organizations standing between the individual and the states as civil society. Okay, these conceptions of civil society as a part of society is the one we often encounter in the discussions of policymakers, development planners, and those seeking to promote democracy. Some even regarded civil society as a part of society that is distinct from the states and the market. For them, civil society is the third sector. Okay, before the term civil society become associated with voluntary associations and other groups, it was used in political theory from Aristotle to Thomas Hobbes to represent a kind of society that was identified with certain ideals such as good life, political equality, and peaceful coexistence. Okay, realizing these ideals, of course, required actions across many different institutions, not just voluntary associations or groups. Okay, in recent years, social and political philosophers have developed a new set of theories about civil society as the public sphere. Okay, the place where people argue with one another about the great questions of the day and negotiate a constantly evolving sense of the common and public interest. Okay, the term public sphere has a much broader meaning that covers private sector, business group, voluntary group, which have certain common or shared space. Okay, there have been differences among scholars of this group regarding the issue of public sphere. Okay, one set of scholars would emphasizes the private versus the state, while another would emphasize the personal versus impersonal sphere of life. Okay, scholars of the first binary oppose the growth of the state and its incursions of everyday life. Okay, scholars of the second binary hold personal life as opposed to the growth of the impersonal sphere, which could include cooperations as well as the state. Okay, these three meaning of civil society coexist in modern social and political discourses. While they may appear mutually exclusively, they are in fact interrelated. Voluntary, non-governmental, or other civil society organizations are generally regarded as genesis that promote democratic ethos. Okay, the second interpretations of civil society as the good society set the contributions of civil society organizations in proper context and guards against the tendency to privilege one part of society over other or ideological groups, civil society over the state and market over both state and civil society, or state over market and civil society. Achieving the goal of good society often require arriving at a fine balance between all the three sectors of society. In other words, good society requires coordinated action between different institutions, all pulling in the same directions. Okay, but now, but how are collective choices made? Trade-off, negotiate, and ends reconciled with means in why that are just and effective. Okay, it is here that the role of public spheres become important. The concept of a public, the whole polity that cares about the common good and has the capacity to deliberate about it democratically is central to civil society thinking. Okay, public sphere is the arena for argument and deliberations as well as for associational and institutional collaborations. Okay, then civil society and state is evolutionary perspective. The classical conception of the idea of civil society was mainly drawn by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Okay, use the term koinonia, which referred to free association of peers. Okay, formed for the better of human life. Okay, for the betterment of human life, civil society is formed. Okay, for Aristotle, a polis was an association of free and equal men bound together by friendship and a common search for justice secured in law. Okay, then in the first century BC, Roman thinker Cicero, okay, used the term civil society to mean a society whose members lived as citizens, abided by the Roman law, and lead a civilized culture and dignified life. Okay, therefore, in his view of civil society, the barbarian communities were not qualified to be described as civil societies. Okay, thus in both the Greek and Roman era, the state represented the idea of political life in all comprehensive terms. Okay, no other spheres of society other than the state was expected to play a political role. Okay, okay. But in the early medieval period, with the rise of the church as a newly political authority, the political sphere came to seen as one among the many spheres. Okay, however, the dual source of authority, the church and the political authority, soon came into conflict, and the relationship between the two became unstable. Unstable, prone to quarrel. Okay, it was in this background of power rivalry between the Christendom and the states that the idea of civil society evolved. Okay, then the evolution of civil society in the modern period can be divided into two phases. Okay, the first phase is associated with the historical event of Renaissance and the Reformation in Europe. This phase was mainly characterized by a long ideological and political battle on behalf of the institutions of the state and against the claim of the church. Okay, with the emergence of a powerful modern state with a new idea of sovereignty, we can say that this struggle ended in favor of the state. Okay, the second phase, which is an outcome of the enlightenment period of 18th century, was marked by articulations of political interest of individual against the authority of the state. Okay, the state's monopoly of power came to increase, challenged by the individuals. Okay, then early modern period, it is the writing of English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Okay, that we find articulations of the modern idea of civil society. Okay, Hobbes used the term civitas or commonwealth to refer to a society which was formed by individuals living in a state of nature to overcome the untenable situations that prevailed during the time. Okay, Hobbes believed that in their own state of nature, people regarded themselves as equal to each other, and in competing for scarce resources lived in a society of all against all. Consequently, life was solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Okay, when people, according to Hobbes, when people were lived in a state of nature, their nature become very bad. Okay, their ruling principles is might is right. Okay, that's why Hobbes talk about a state. Okay, and civil society. Okay, upon realizing that such a state of constant struggle for individual power limited the social development and commonwealth, people strive for a new basis for society in which civic virtues are derived from natural law. Okay, the first of which the first of which is that all person ought to seek peace, and the second one should respect the right of others in order to safeguard one's own rights. Okay. Another English philosopher, John Locke, states that civil society should be understood as a body in its own right, separated from the state. Okay, that means state and civil society is totally separated from each other. Okay, in this, the two treatises on civil government, Locke related the idea of civil society with political society. Civil society in Locke uses in the optimal remedy for the state of nature. He observed that when people relinquish the state and set up a government for the protections of their natural right, life, liberty, and property, they enter into civil society. Okay, the state of nature, according to law, is a hypothetical condition of human beings prior to the formation of the political and civil society. Okay, Locke also argued that the power of the state should be limited and constrained by dividing its power into three functional components carried out by two separate branches: the legislative branches concerned with creations of law, and the executive branches with the responsibility for the functions of enforcing the law and conducting foreign policy. Okay, he based his idea on the doctrine of God given natural law, which posits that individual citizens, even in the state of nature, had certain natural rights, such as the preservations of life, liberty, property. Okay, therefore he advocated that individuals be allowed to meet together, from associations, and enter into a relations of their choice. Okay, what is the basic difference between Hobbes and Locke concept of state? Both are argued that both when people are living in the state of nature, according to Hobbes, their life is poor, nasty, brutish, short. Okay, might is right is the ruling principles, but when state and civil society come, their life become better. Okay, so they made state absolute. Okay, they made sovereign absolute powerful. Okay, but in case of Locke says that some rights are given by the nature, they can be taken by the state or civil society. Okay, so he made a limited sovereign. Okay, that means people only surrender their life, liberty, and property, and state can provide security to these institutions. Okay, this is the basic difference between Hobbes and Locke. Okay, in the century of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, he is another contextualist. Okay, the Geneva based philosopher felt that Hobbes and Locke had too much importance on the right of the individual at the expense of common good. Okay, he devised the idea of the social contract as a mean whereby citizens would make the common good for their highest priority. Okay, he argues that since common people are to be the lawmakers, they will promulgated law that result in moderating accumulations of individual wealth and thereby promote equality and trust. Okay, the state is the arena for defining the nature of the common good, and civil society emerge when all peoples are willing to abide by the general will. That means Rousseau given importance to the general will, which is a combination of goodwill for all community people. Okay, then rise of political economy and the enlightenment concept of civil society. The end of the 18th century brought about another distinction between the state and the society. Society no longer mean that fundamental union between human beings that the state establishes. Civil society emerged as a network of interactions and exchange formed by individuals exercising the right to pursue the satisfactions of their particular needs in their own way. Okay, Montesquieu points out that commercialization cures human beings of their prejudice that conceal their true needs. Once human beings realize their true neediness, they will discover their sense of humanity, which would suspend the previous religious, ethnic, and national sectarianism. Okay, so this is all about the civil society and state. Then civil society as a part of society and life path of the state. Okay, as pointed out in the earlier section, that Alexander de Tocqueville regarded civil society as a distinct part of society comprising of association. In democratic in America have gave a new view in civil society state relationship. Okay, he said civil society need to play its role to safeguard against the tyranny of the state and for the defense of the freedom of individual. Okay, according to him, there is a despotic tendency in modern state which can be controlled only by the developing civil associations which are now under the control of the state. Okay, civil society must find the means to limit state power and hold it accountable. Okay, in this regard, a plurality of association is necessary for consolidating the democratic revolutions. He considered civil associations as arenas in which individuals can direct their attention to more than their selfish. Therefore, a pluralistic and self-organized civil society that is independent to the state is absolutely necessary for democratic to flourish. Okay, then civil society as the public sphere. Okay, The conception of civil society as a public sphere where individual and groups come together to freely deliberate and identity society problem in a recent role. Okay, in it can be traced to the winning of one German philosopher in his structural transformations of the public sphere. Habermas, okay, argued that in the pre-Enlightenment years, European culture was dominated by representational culture, where one party sought to represent itself on its audience by overwhelming its subject. Okay, the monarch, for instance, build enormous places and movement to overthrow the public. Okay, with the rise of capitalism, this feudal stage of representation has been replaced by public sphere, which is outside by the control by the state. Okay, public sphere is an arena in social life where individuals came together to freely discuss and identify societal problem, and through that discussion influence public action. Okay, uh, the public debate takes place in the public sphere through the mass media, as well as meeting on through social media, academic writing, and government policy document. Okay, in this public sphere, civil society become the arena for argument and deliberations, as well as for associations and institutional collaboration. The extent to which such public space is available is a good indicator of democracy, as it is only in a democracy that all opinions and viewpoint are represented and no viewpoint is excluded or suppressed. This is all about civil society. Okay, then how civil society can be criticized. Okay, the two principal critics of enlightenment concept of civil society appeared in the 19th century in the philosophers of Greek, Hegel, okay, and Karl Marx. Okay, the German philosopher Hegel brought a paradigm shift in theoretical study to state civil society relationship. He was the first scholar to draw a theoretical distinction between the state and civil society. For him, civil societies are historical products of economic modernizations and bourgeoisie-driven economy. He conceptualized civil society as a sphere consisting of people involved in the market. Okay, in other words, civil society is a specific arena of economic activity based on property exchange. In this sense, he positioned civil society between the sphere of family and state. Okay, he also argued that civil society are based on the principle of universal egoism, and therefore it represents conflict of interest in the society. Therefore, according to him, state should represent the whole interest of the society, and there is a necessary for the state to consult, supervise, and control the civil society. Okay, then another scholar, German scholar Karl Marx, further expanded the study of civil society relationship. Okay, Marx in his writings such as on the Jewish questions, contribution to the critique of Hegel philosophy of right, used the term civil society to make a critique of Hegel and German idealism. Okay, Marx also claimed that the basic contradiction in modern society is between man as citizen, okay, and man as private individual. But contradicting Hegel, Marx argued that state cannot stand above civil society to protect universal interest against the private interest articulated in civil society. Okay, for Marx, civil society included within its sphere the whole of pre-state economic and social life. The true nature of civil society, according to Marx, can be understood by analyzing the nature of political economy. Marx' analysis of civil society either dismiss or ignore the implicit sign of communal mutuality to which Hegel attached so much important. Okay, Marx denied the existence of civil society as an independent sphere, but saw its origin in the class relations in the political economy. Okay, so for Marx, civil society is the site of class struggle. Okay, he says that civil society is the indications of class struggle. Okay. Then civil society and state in different concepts. Civil society in state in Western Europe from exclusive to inclusive. Okay, it is initial state during the early 18th and 19th century. Civil society in Western Europe was determined by economic and academic elites that demanded civil and human rights and political participation. Okay, sorry. In its second phase during 19th and 20th century, civil society widened its area of activity and potential. New actors enter into civil society, for instance, the social movement of the working class, farmer or churches, who not only engage in social welfare but also articulated political and societal claims. Then US and Western Europe social capital debate. Okay, beginning in the United States, a rich debate emerged in the 1990s regarding the performance of major social institutions, including representative government and in relations to political, cultural, civil society. Then its next one is Eastern Europe challenges of a threefold transitions. The countries of the Western Europe went through some social and political transformation in its history of the last century, which can be explained in three folds. Okay, the political transformations from dictatorship to democracy, the economic transformation from state to market economy, and the state transformation due to the disintegrations of the erstwhile USSR. Okay, then post-colonial context. The applicability of the concept of civil society in post-colonial context has been heavily criticized as arguments against the universal applicability of a concept developed within Western political philosophy. Okay, like the Western and Eastern Europe in the developing post-colonial countries too, the concept of civil society was revived during the 1980s and 1990s, particularly when the Latin America countries, including Brazil, Argentina, uh, sorry, came under authoritarian dictatorship. Okay, so this is all about your state and civil society. Then some you maybe write down some probable questions. How state can play an active role in developed countries? What is the difference between state and civil society? Then what is the contribution of Gramsci to understand the concept of civil society? Then what is the liberal perspectives of state? The next one, what is the Marxist perspective of state? So this is all about from today's class. If you have any query or doubt, you can ask me. If you have any doubt, then you can ask me. Okay, then thank you.